Welcome, everyone. I am Padmaja Sarathy, and today the webinar topic is navigating the maze of transitions that happen for children birth to 5 years. They may be moving from early intervention to preschool programs, and then from preschool program to school-age special education services, preschool special education to school-age services. I also want to take this opportunity to thank AbleNet for hosting the webinar, and let's learn together. I do want to mention that this is an introductory level webinar for a lot of people. However, I am hopeful you will walk away with some new ideas on how you can pursue collaborative relationship. As the title slide showed, teamwork is the essence of pursuing an effort or multiple efforts, combined effort to pursue family-focused and child-centered practices. And that's what this one is about, in order for children to have a very smooth transition process in the early years. So what are we going to be doing in this webinar 1 and webinar 2? You will get an overview of the transition process, kind of a roadmap, the sequence of events that take place for children birth to 5. And how can we achieve smooth transition? Not only there may be sometimes a breakdown in services, but if the service is not smooth and if there is a lot of conflict between sending programs and receiving programs, or from service providers and the family, unfortunately, the child suffers. So we want to have a smooth transition that lasts the entire time the child receiving services. What do transitions mean in the early years? A child who may be very involved may have had a pretty difficult childbirth, or some medical issues, may be transitioning from the hospital to a home with a lot of concerns. Then the transitions may occur from Part C, which is the early intervention service, to preschool special education service, from community preschool or a faith-based program to a preschool special education service. And then there is the next transition, though it may happen within the school district sometimes, or from outside to the kindergarten program, that is also a transition. So all of these things we will be addressing in the webinar 1 and 2. And one of the major things that I'm going to share with you is what professionals, when I talk about professionals, I'm talking about the sending program, the receiving program, the early intervention professionals and the early childhood professionals, and the school district's kindergarten program people. How can they pursue a child-focused and family-focused outcomes for the child? And one of the things I'm going to share with you is a model, I could call it a system, an approach that I previously mentioned about the collaborative relationship, a coordinated system of services which has several component elements of pursuing family-focused and child-focused services that I had developed for a school district a number of years ago, which had a lot of surveys, which had an ongoing evaluation, and we addressed multiple things for the child and the family that the service providers could pursue. So I'm going to be talking about that approach in more generic terms so that you can get some ideas from there to pursue your own best practices. And one of the things, important things that we need to do for families is to demystify the process. Many families who have children who have developmental delay or who may have a disabling condition or have a diagnosis of a disability, for many of them, this transition from home to various services, it's kind of frightening. We, especially in the school districts, we want to demystify that process. We want to dispel the myths. We want to be able to help the families and present the information in an easy manner without using a lot of the jargon that we traditionally use, and to build a very positive, productive relationship with families so that it lasts throughout the years to benefit both the family and particularly the child. And just to introduce myself, you see on this slide a number of books that I have published through various publishers. There are a number of books as well as couple of quick reference guides, and two of them focus on this early childhood and early intervention transition process. One of them is a parent guide. So as I mentioned previously, a major objective is to demystify the process for families. That's our service providers' responsibility. We begin with providing families a kind of roadmap that kind of sequences the various events that will happen in the early years. And an informational brochure that lists that, as well as face-to-face meetings, as well as education seminars, will provide that family empowerment for them to be able to make the decisions. So we will be assisting families with their decision-making process. And then we need to clear some fears, that anxieties that families may have. We have to identify the highlights from the early intervention services and the early childhood special education services. We have to be able to identify for the families the different players and the process and what they can do and what they will be doing at different stages, so that families will know the role that they have to play to assist in this transition process. And then one of the important things is explain the associated terminology. For example, we use the term IFSP and IEP, the acronyms that families have never heard that. And it is not enough if we just expand, say, individual education plan. They have no idea what we are talking about, what it involves. We have to take the time, spend the additional amount of time, especially in the early years, for families to become knowledgeable in order to make valuable decisions for their child. The other term that we often use, related services. Families don't know what related services are. And so it is important to explain that, taking the time and being very patient. And when we take the time and involve actively with the family and help them with the role that they have to play, we build trust. And it's a lasting collaborative relationship with the family that will enable both the family to be successful in pursuing the right decisions and enable the child to be successful in the school system. So what happens in the early years? There is the Part C, which is the early intervention program. It serves children birth to 3. And then about 90 days before the child turns 3, the child there is a conference with the school district, and the child, if the child is eligible, may move on to the preschool special education services. And then if the child continues to meet eligibility for special education, the child moves on to the next stage at the kindergarten level into the school age services. But it is important that the school district and everyone else follows the law so that the child gets timely access to appropriate services that is complying with the legal requirements. That reminds me of a situation where a family may have received early intervention services through the Part C Birth to 3 program, and the child may or may not qualify, may not meet eligibility for the preschool special education services. And that's an important time because the way the Part C program looks at a child's need in terms of the disabling condition and developmental delay is different from the eligibility requirements for a school district and the IDEA requirements for preschool children. So it is important to take that additional time at that point to explain and to empathize with the family, because they are going to ask, oh, my child was receiving occupational therapy and physical therapy and speech therapy. How is it that my child does not qualify? So it is important that there is timely access, but it's also important to explain if the child does not meet eligibility, and how the policies and the structures and the other mechanisms are there to support this transition process. And as I mentioned, it's difficult for families to move from one system to another, and especially because Part C services are very much, it's a family-focused system. And the child may receive services even at home, or the child may receive services in a daycare center or a child care center that the family has is receiving services, and it's a very family-oriented service. And so it is important for the Part C program also to prepare the child as well as the family to move to the next environment, which is preschool special education services, where the focus changes from an intensive family focus to a child focus. And that way we achieve positive outcomes for both families and their children. So, as I just mentioned, infants and toddlers, they are eligible for the Part C program. And the way the eligibility is, if the infant or the toddler has a developmental delay or has a diagnosed condition with a high probability of resulting in developmental delay, and at the decision of individual states, the children who are at risk for delay may also be included in this target population of receiving Part C services. And the early intervention services, as I mentioned before, both child and family receive services. They go through a multidisciplinary evaluation and assessment, and they come up with a plan. It's called the Individualized Family Service Plan, IFSP. And so, as I said, the services are available to both the child and the family as it is described in the IFSP. And as also another thing that happens is in the IFSP, if it happens around the time the child is going to be turning 3, when I said around 90 days before the child turns 3, the IFSP will also identify, the transition conference that is going to take place. With the family's consent, the Part C program can inform the school district about the transition conference, and the school district will participate in that program. And each state or each school district may do it somewhat differently, but that is the law. I am not going to go too much into the law, but just to briefly touch on that. So what does IDEA requirements for early intervention services? Provide a range of services depending on the needs that were identified during that multidisciplinary evaluation. And it'll be provided by qualified personnel. And then they will come up with that IFSP plan. And then that IFSP plan, as I said, should include a transition plan on how the child will transition to the Part B program. And then, as I said, the family should give consent if they would like the school district involvement in this. The early intervention services, or the lead agency that's providing that service, will notify the school district. And it has to happen 90 days before the third birthday. Let's assume the child didn't receive any Part C services. What happens then? If it happens, let's say, a month before the child turns 3, then the Part C is really not Part C, which is the early intervention. It's not really responsible anymore, except if the parent approaches, it is the responsibility of Part C to inform the school district. Or the parents may themselves approach the school district through the child find announcements that may be placed in the local newspaper or in various avenues. And the IDEA requires that these early intervention services are provided in a natural environment for the child. That's in a child's home or in a child's care setting to the maximum extent that's possible. So moving from a heavy, intensive family focus to a child focus in Part B. From Part C, we are moving to Part B. It's called Part B, Section 619, Preschool Program. And it is intended to help states that all preschool-age children, 3 to 5 years of age, will receive special education and related services if they meet eligibility for services. I found there were a number of resources that are very helpful in understanding and gaining more knowledge about this topic and about explanation of the services and what are some best practices. So one of the services, one of the websites, it's about Part B and Part C both. It's called the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. So you will find more information. My purpose here is to give you an overview and not to inundate you with a lot of details, but just to identify the best practices. But you are welcome to go visit that. And I have it also in the resources sections towards the end of this presentation. Okay. A number of issues and challenges, which is what we found when I worked for a school district a number of years ago in the early childhood area. A number of issues and challenges impact achieving smooth transitions for children and their families. Some of them are system issues. There are some system issues in terms of this is the way we do things, system inflexibility. And then there are some staff issues, either staff in the way they communicate or the staff in terms of their knowledge base, staff in their terms of pursuing family-focused and child-focused, again because of PD, maybe issues. One example, for example, do we always remember to use people first language? And that we don't ever say he is learning disabled. he is emotionally disturbed. We say he is a child with emotional disturbance. So are we remembering? That's another part of the staff training. And then there may be family issues. Either families feel terribly anxious, or families are reluctant to get involved. Families are unhappy about the move from one system to the other. And then there are the child issues in terms of child's adjustment to different settings. So let's see, what are your challenges that you face? Do you experience problems in collaboration and communication issues between sending and receiving, let's say, Part C to Part B, or from preschool services to kindergarten program? Is that your issue that you often face? Or do you encounter problems in professional teaming, teaming together between sending and receiving, between preschool and kindergarten, different staff members, in coming up with a coordinated approach to serve the child? Is that your issue? Or do you find that there is inadequate preparation of service providers in pursuing family and child-focused services and practices? Or do you have problems, do you experience problems in families playing an active role, families getting involved in the transition? Or do you find system inflexibility in terms of meeting individual family situations, especially when families come from diverse cultural and language backgrounds? Or do you have difficulty in getting everybody on board in terms of pursuing child-focused adaptations and supports and the technology that the child needs? Let's see. Okay, you have the slide here that shows different things that may present a challenge. Which transition issue presents the greatest challenge for you? Okay, looks like it's interesting. The numbers are increasing, but I see system inflexibility, teaming. Oof. Okay, it's still coming. So the collaboration between sending and receiving program and the system inflexibility looks like are the major issues. And I'm going to suggest various ways the sending-receiving program collaboration can happen. But of course, it's meeting of people's minds, but maybe we can convince them through a variety of ways that how, if we put a system in place, we will succeed together on behalf of families and children. Okay, so this is how it looks. And sending and receiving collaboration, sending and receiving program collaboration seems to be the major issue, and that's the focus of today's webinar as well as next week. Okay, so limited lack of collaboration, you identified that as a major issue, different policies, compliance problems in meeting timelines, though it's really we are breaking the law when we face compliance issues. But what happens often is that people don't think about these things until the last minute. So we don't have a system in place and automatically happens. That's one thing. The other thing that I will point out again a little later is to have a kind of a single designated person as a single point of contact so that the family deals with that person, even though there may be other people working, but we go through and that person maintains kind of the ongoing contact with the sending and the receiving program as well as with the family. And system inadequacy in preparing families, and I will also share with you various ideas for that. And one of the other issues definitely is when families come from diverse backgrounds and they have different attitudes and approaches to special education, or even the idea of a disability, its interpretation of that itself is very different based on the community or the language background or the cultural diversity that will come about. Okay, and then of course, most people, we would like to say it's because we don't have the time or the money, and it does require a tremendous commitment from everyone involved, the sending, receiving program, and also the family. So, and then there may be staff issues impacting the transition success, the knowledge level and the skill level of different professionals and the staff who are serving the children directly. Do we have adequate training? And one of the beautiful things that has happened with the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, is they say that the funds that are available for staff training can be utilized by everybody, including the early childhood programs. And so let's capitalize on that funding in order to empower our families as well as the professionals, as well as reach out. If the children are in a community preschool, if the children are attending a Head Start program, let's reach out and bring everybody together for that technical assistance, for that coaching, for that monthly seminars that we may do, instead of saying this is for the school district only to prepare families. But let's open it out to others so that they all attend and the cost is the same. And coordinating the service. So we are serving the child as a team. And then understanding and responding positively, as I said, to culturally and linguistically diverse families. And then one of the interesting things I came across working in this area many years ago was sometimes the Part C professional became so attached to the family and the child, they had actually separation anxiety. So we have to make sure what is best for the child and the family. So some family concerns that may come up is many families don't feel comfortable starting a new program when they have become used to a program either at home or in a community preschool or Head Start where they have started their child, and then soon, maybe 6 months or 8 months, the child has attended, and suddenly the child has to move to the preschool program because the child is turning 3. That can be very anxiety-causing situation for the parent. And frequently what we do is, that's what the law says, that's what we have to do. We have to put ourselves in the family's perspective and say, I fully understand why this family is feeling so anxious. That baby, that toddler, that young child of 2 has just been in this program and now has to move to a different location and site. With people they don't know. We have just become comfortable with this group of people. And then that is where we have to provide a lot more information to the family to comfort them, to help them understand. And then, of course, as I mentioned right at the beginning, different eligibility requirements from Part C to Part B. And families who have received Part C services, if they no longer, the child qualifies for Part B, that will raise some major concern. Again, we have to take that time to meet with the family, explain, and the sending and receiving program have to do a coordinated job of saying the same thing to comfort the family. And then one of the things, I don't want to repeat it over and over again, the sensitivity and responsiveness to families, especially from diverse backgrounds. One of the things I like to mention here is some cultures, the whole idea of the term disability is very uncomfortable for them. So we have to understand that. And I happen to come from one of those communities myself. I mean, that's not how I look at it now. That's what I would have looked at it if I had lived in the country that I was born in. So it is important. And the other thing that's frightening for many, many families, this is family feedback, is when we have that IEP meeting with a number of professionals sitting there, and the family is the lone person kind of who feels, I'm the one person representing the child, but it's actually the whole team representing or talking about the child and for the child, but the family may feel intimidated by the rest of the professional, and that is when we have to be cautious and make the family at ease, use simple language, make it very conversational, and to avoid jargon. So this is a comment from a parent, her perspective. I wonder how I can get any help for my child. She had not, tried to get any services yet, and the child is 23 months, and he's worried about. She is worried about some of his behaviors. He gets upset, she says, over small things and throws the most awful tantrums. I'm not sure if this is just the terrible twos that everyone talks about, or if there is something really wrong with my child. How can I find out? One of the responsibilities, if it is a school district, is to make sure there are child find announcements. And it is important for the family to reach out to Part C services and see, but also it is helpful for the school district or whoever meets with this particular parent to have a kind of a checklist that identifies some developmental concerns and at the same time a typical child, what are some developmental behaviors exhibited by a typical child, as well as the developmental concerns, that a checklist so that the family can check through that and feel certain sense of understanding and knowledge building as a result of looking at that, and then make a decision to approach. And also it is important for that Part C person or the school district person to say, we can do the screening. If the child is 3 years old, we can do the screening and find out and give you information. This is another situation, family is concerned. And in this particular case, the child, the 3-year-old, who is going to turn 3, is moving to the preschool program, has been receiving the ECI, Early Childhood Intervention, EI, Early Intervention Services. And the child has cerebral palsy, so some significant multiple needs. And in addition, she also has a mild visual impairment. Naturally, the family is very concerned and worried if the child will have a smooth transition to a program where the family does not play such an active role as in the early intervention program. So what the families need to know, what role they can play. It is the important responsibility for early intervention services and the preschool services to provide the necessary guidance for the families to understand the process. That how the identification and the eligibility for the service will occur, who will conduct the evaluation, what they will do during the evaluation, and how parents are part of this evaluation process, and developing a program, a plan for the child. I want to say here that if you have the time, do go visit the Division for Early Childhood Recommended Practices. They have 2 recommended practices for service providers to pursue as best practices. That is that the sending program and the receiving program exchange information before, during, and after transition. Because once the child transitions, our responsibility does not end. We want to make sure the child has adjusted to the new setting and is successful in that setting. So when you get a chance, do go check out the DEC recommended practices. And I also would like to mention 2 other sections of the recommended practices. That is the teaming and collaboration strategies, and that is very, very critical for children birth to 5. And then the family-centered practices, and that's what this webinar is all about. So what are some child difficulties during transition? The child may have difficulty adjusting to the new setting, to the new routines, to unfamiliar people, unfamiliar activities from what the child was doing, and kind of maybe more wandering around doing what he or she wanted in the Birth to 3 program, but it may be much more definitive and structured, and there is a certain routine that they follow. And that may cause certain fear and anxiety in the child. And the child may not have the age-appropriate social skills, and may not have the way to communicate with the people to express his or her anxiety or fear. And the child may be lacking in skills that facilitate active engagement in the new setting and with the new activities and with the new people. And the previous program, which is the early intervention services or wherever the child receives services, may not have prepared the child for a more structured routine and activities that's pursued in a preschool setting. So we looked at all of these issues that I just discussed when I was working, and I created this kind of a cohesive, coordinated approach or system called Together We Succeed, which was very heavily family and child-focused, and it won an award many years ago as a promising practice. So what are some things that are the component elements? First and foremost, how do we provide parent education and empowerment throughout this transition process, before, during, and after the transition, through seminars, through meeting with the family, informal meetings, formal meetings, so through a variety of things. Yes, it does require a bit more time, but once you establish that strong relationship with the family during these early years, it will pay. We will reap many, many rewards, and we will make the family a partner which will enable that child to succeed. And the other important thing is the collaborative relationship where we coordinated together with the sending program. If you are the district, or a school district, the receiving coordinate so that that family education and empowerment is a combined joint effort. And that also works with preparing the staff, preparing the preschool teachers, preparing the kindergarten teachers, and the early intervention staff together in a coordinated manner. And one of the things which I will address during the next webinar is how do we evaluate this transition process? How do we make sure there is ongoing data gathered through surveys, questionnaires, and family service provider questionnaires? And also, how do we make sure we prepare the child for the next environment? And how do we provide follow-up support for that child and make sure that the supports that were available in one setting is also available in the new setting? So this is kind of a chart that shows all the family and child-focused strategies and activities that we pursued in that system. Guidance and support, parent education seminars, and then there were also informational brochures that showed a comparison chart between EI services, preschool services, and then from preschool services to school-age services. And if you kind of show it as a comparison chart, it helps families to understand it. And then another thing that I want to mention about is these community fairs, where the sending program and the receiving program work together, and we held this a couple of times a year, where we invited families, either families that were currently receiving early intervention or currently receiving preschool, and then there will be different booths with personnel from various programs showcasing their activities so that families will get an understanding of what activities, what routines. They will walk away with some brochures. They will walk away with maybe a book to read with their child. So it's kind of a very happy combination event, a community fair, but we bring all the service providers together to share information with the family, which can be very empowering. And the other thing that helps is, while there may be a number of personnel who are involved, a single point of contact is extremely important in order to have a smooth transition process. And I already mentioned about collaboration and teaming. And one of the things that helped with all of these planning of these activities and implementation of these family and child-focused activity was forming a transition advisory committee that included members from the sending program, school district, a family representative from maybe a faith-based program where the children were attending, or the Head Start, and the Head Start, maybe some PreK person. So, number of people that are likely to be serving the child or that are currently serving children receiving preschool special education services. So, you had different persons representing different areas or agencies and programs coming together and planning, working together on these information brochures, community fair, so that the responsibility is divided. And then one of the important things is staff preparation as well as an ongoing evaluation. These were the component elements. So I'm going to move on in terms of case scenarios. Let's say a child who has been receiving early intervention services. The child has been diagnosed with Down syndrome. She has, let's say, moderate communication impairment, and parents are very actively involved in supporting the child's, I made a mistake there, I have Sarah instead of Anna, educational outcome. And she reaches out to family, reaches out to people. She's smiling, she's friendly, and that's her strength. How do we make sure that the receiving program capitalizes on that strength? But she also has needs, and how do we make sure we continue to address those needs in the preschool program and then later on when she moves? So we have to ask, what are some families' concerns? And we have to make sure we address and meet those concerns. What is she doing currently? How can we make sure that we carry over some of the goals if she was not able to meet it in the EI setting? And some of the concerns that family may have, is she going to be with other children who are her age, kind of inclusive setting? So one of the things is to give the family a kind of a welcome packet with the informational brochures. And the other important thing is to help the family come up with a profile of identifying the strengths, identifying the needs, and then using that in preparing the IFSP, but certainly the IEP for that child, and then comparison chart. This is a chart that you can look at if you want even later on. This compares the early intervention services with the preschool services, and if you show that, what is the eligibility requirement for one, the other one, what would be the focus, the family focus in EI versus the child focus, and the child IEP in the preschool services, and what is it model that's used, what early intervention services may cost, whereas preschool services come under free and appropriate public education, FAPE. And so these are all important things for families to know, and kind of providing it in a chart like that will empower families to make the right decisions. So this would be the kind of a receiving program's role, in a way, working with the sending program. Multiple opportunities for the parent to meet with the program staff, also to visit the programs, and also to participate in the parent education seminars, and like the community fair, special events offered by the school district, but in coordination with the others. And also one of the things that was in that model that I shared with you, an approach, is the school district also provided, through their itinerant staff, instructional support staff, provided technical assistance and coaching to Head Start and community preschools if the child was attending that, maybe in the afternoon, in the morning they may have participated in the preschool and in the afternoon, or the parent may have preferred to continue in the community preschool and not access the actual site location of the preschool's program, but providing technical assistance and coaching to the staff at these community settings will empower them, and we can make sure that the child is getting those adaptations and supports in that setting. So if we can establish a kind of a understanding with those staff, that is another element that enables the child to be successful. So the sending program has to provide a kind of a map of sequence of events and make sure that there is a language interpreter if needed, and identify and discuss with the receiving program what are some family preferences. What are their outlook? What do they think about their child and the child's strengths and the disabling condition? These are all important things that the sending program needs to share with the receiving program. And then also to make sure that these records and the information, and if the child was using any kind of assistive technology device, all of those plans and devices and tools, the information about them is shared in a timely manner with the new program. And to give you a picture of what I just shared with you, kind of a timeline, just like the chart before, comparing the two services, a timeline of events charted like this would help families, because it is this visual representation helps the understanding of, helps families to understand the transition process. So this is one area I think we are still growing. How do we address the needs of families who are coming from different cultures or different language backgrounds? As I mentioned right at the beginning, it is important for us to, first of all, understand our own limitations, how our own culture views child delay or child's diagnosis or child's disability. So we have to respect, and one of the things, for example, some may say, why is it that only the father is always coming to these meetings? I mean, these are questions that have come up, and we have to recognize, be aware, and appreciate and respect different cultures and different approaches and the differences, and use families and their strengths in helping with our interventions. So these are some questions a family service provider has to consider. What does the transition process mean to my family? At the end, do they fully understand? Have I explained everything? Are they aware of all the options? Do they understand all of the terminology? Do they have sufficient social support? Do we have to hook them up with a mentor family who has received services? Do we want to make sure we hook them up with a family from a similar cultural or linguistic background? Are there effective communication lines constantly open and available to these families to make sure that the transition is smooth for their child? So there comes another poll. I want to ask you, many of you may be pursuing some of these best practices. If not, maybe tweak some of yours to pursue these best practices. Do you offer a kind of a welcome packet with different kinds of brochures, information, comparison charts to your families? Do you present a comparison of the services offered by early intervention and preschool to kindergarten? Do you provide guidance to families? Do you offer a series of parent education seminars on behavior skills, social emotional, developmental milestones, developmental concerns, a seminar where you address both the age relevant or typical developmental milestones as well as maybe concerns, and to increase the knowledge of families about language skills, about how to promote your child's cognitive skills, brain research, all of these things through parent-partner education seminars. Do you have assigned a person as a single point of contact? And do you prepare the child for the next environment? And do you provide follow-up support? Check all that you do in the next. All that you do. All the family, child-focused transition activities that you pursue. It's coming. Oh. It's wonderful to see that many of you provide child preparation and follow-up support. That is very, very critical, especially after the child has moved into the new program. And the single point of contact also helps a lot, because that way you cannot say, I don't know anything about this situation or anything, and that is very productive towards meeting timelines and in communicating and alleviating some of the fears and anxieties of the families. And many of you have transition welcome packet. That's great. Okay, then you can add the comparison chart of services offered to that welcome packet. That's wonderful. It's great. Actually, the single point of contact and child preparation is some of the actively pursued best practices. Wonderful. Okay, now going into the resources, as I mentioned before, ECTA Center offers two checklists, transition checklists. One is from EI to Part B, and then from preschool special education to kindergarten. Those are very helpful checklists. And then these are the two books that I have on the subject. And then these are all some of the resources that you will find helpful with assisting with the early childhood transition, early intervention, and early childhood. And some, the Department of Education, they have resources too that will help. They have guides. Many of the websites that are listed on this slide are very helpful. There is the National Early Childhood Transition Center, and very, very helpful. I think it's just 1 or 2 pages, and that provides guidance. It offers a variety of materials to inform families of this transition process, and that's the PACER Center. And Office of Special Education also has Part C guidance and training resources at their website. So there are multiple resources, and my idea is to take that information, summarize it, and present it to you. I hope the ideas were helpful, so many of you can continue to pursue or tweak and refine your current practices. The next webinar will focus extensively on child preparation activities, which many of you say are pursuing quite aggressively, but I will go into specifics, and also how to evaluate your transition process to see if it's working on behalf of families and children. And successful transitions do lead to successful outcomes for children and families, and for children all throughout their life. Maybe it will have an impact. The next webinar is on March 22nd at the same time. And I'm extremely grateful and thankful to AbleNet University for hosting this webinar. Thank you. And at this time, I will answer any questions that you may have through the chat bar.
I don't see any questions at this time.
Looks like there are no questions.
Oh, one person says, hold on, please.
Oh, okay. They are typing it in. If there are any questions, please let me know.
Darlene is wondering what type of Part B settings and services are others finding successful?
Yeah, it's very difficult to kind of answer that question, but I will try my best. Some children or some families prefer the community preschool setting, and if the district has a kind of an arrangement with that community preschool, they may go and provide kind of monitoring and any technical assistance maybe once a month, once in 6 weeks. It depends on the arrangement between the community preschool or the Head Start program and the family and the school district. And I know Part B children, some of them, if they qualify for special education services and they want a more they want to continue if the child had been participating in a Head Start program or something, they may continue that. So that's another. And one of the other services, of course, is in the regular Part B, it may not be. It may be an inclusive setting within the school district in the PreK program. So these are all, there may, and some children I know, for example, many years ago when I was working, that this particular group of children, their parents, some of them decided to continue their child in the faith-based program that the child had been attending since maybe 2 years of age, and they continued and they received just speech therapy maybe because they opted out of the special education service. So various ways, and also again it depends on your state regulations and how the school district decides to provide that services. So there are various options. But if the child qualifies for special education, the child is eligible to receive services through the school district. Okay, there is somebody, Deborah, has answered. In supplement to Darlene's question, that inclusive setting for B services in school, in preschool, is primarily how, in school preschool. That is usually the pre-kindergarten program or preschool program within the school district, where the majority of 4 and 5-year-olds and are typical in those rooms, and our special needs transitioning 3-year-olds are overwhelmed and often unsuccessful with those classrooms routines. That is absolutely true. That's why I mentioned about the child anxiety and the child problem. And usually, if the child had been receiving Part C services, maybe parents may prefer, to continue maybe in a community preschool. And if the school district can provide some service or follow-up monitoring, that would help especially the 3-year-old. But some of the school districts do offer a program for 3-year-olds, and one of the districts I know, what they had was they had a kind of a child care service that was also offered through the school district, so that the children had the opportunity to be kind of in an inclusive setting within the school districts. Within the school district, and to have peers who were typically developing. And this again varies from district to district. I don't see any more questions. So thank you very much. Again, thank you to AbleNet University, and thank you all for joining this webinar. Have a great day.